This is Democracy Watch. Mark, Trump has made a new nomination within the Department of Justice that's led to you sounding the alarm. And when you're concerned about an otherwise obscure nomination within the DOJ, then I think it's absolutely worth covering here. So can you speak on who he's tapped to lead the DOJ's Civil Rights Division and why it's so significant?
Yeah, so he tapped a Republican vote suppressor lawyer named Harmeet Dhillon. Now, many of you may know her name because he used Harmeet as his lawyer over the years for various things like to fight against removal from the ballot in some voting cases. She was one of Kari Lake's advisors when Kari Lake ran for governor. And she then ran for chair of the Republican National Committee against Ronna McDaniel. And she ran on a platform. Now, she lost that race, but she ran on a platform of basically building up what they call the election integrity part of their operation, but is the vote suppression operation. And she runs a law firm that has been involved in dozens of cases attacking voting rights or preventing, making voting easier.
So what does this signal in terms of Trump's priorities as far as voting rights are concerned moving forward?
I mean, look, this is somewhat Orwellian, all right? He chose someone who attacks voting rights to be the chief person in charge of protecting voting rights. I mean, it is of a piece with, making, Kennedy, Robert Kennedy, in charge of the vaccines. You know what I mean? It is an insult, and it is even by Republican standards. I mean, look, I didn't expect we were going to get a full-throated, defender of the Voting Rights Act under Donald Trump.
But at the same time,
right? But by the same time, this breaks new ground, even relative to what Ronald Reagan did, what George Bush I did, George Bush II, or even what Donald Trump did in his first term.
Now, you've called for the DOJ to dismiss its pending voting rights cases and withdraw itself from those in which it's already intervened. That seems antithetical to what the DOJ should be doing. So what's the deal here? Why are you calling for the DOJ right now while Biden is still in charge to withdraw itself from these cases?
It's a really important question. So you're right. I have said that the Department of Justice needs to withdraw from all of the voting rights cases it is currently in while Joe Biden is president. Why is that? Because I do not want Harmeet Dhillon to reverse the positions in those cases that the Department of Justice has taken. So right now, if the Department of Justice in the Mississippi case you and I have talked about, this is the case in which the Republican National Committee is trying to attack the counting of certain vote-by-mail ballots. Well, the Department of Justice has taken the position that those ballots should be counted, right? That these people shouldn't be disenfranchised. What I fear is that Harmeet Dhillon is going to come in and she is going to instruct the Department of Justice lawyers to now flip sides and now say, no, we now think the Republican National Committee is correct. And so what I don't need as a lawyer, my law firm and I represent the people trying to defend the Mississippi law. It's one thing if DOJ is on your side, that's great. It's even okay if DOJ is not involved. It is not helpful if now DOJ is on the other side, right? So now we're fighting not just the RNC, but fighting the Department of Justice. So I think there's virtually no chance the Department of Justice will continue to have a pro-voting stance in any of the cases. And so it is better to get them out of these cases than let Harmeet Dhillon come in, take them over, flip sides, and cause a lot of trouble.
Well, by that same token, couldn't the DOJ also seek to intervene on behalf of the Republicans, even if they're not participating in these lawsuits?
Yes, but this brings me to, the overriding hopeful theory I have of everything Donald Trump, which is incompetence can rule the day, right? So if they have to do the work to get her in place, get her confirmed, find her lawyers who will do her bidding within the Department of Justice, and then first file paperwork to get into cases, that will take longer. And they may not pull it off. So yes, is that a problem that we face in over the course of 4 years? Absolutely. As she gains control of DOJ, that will be a problem. But there's no reason to give her a running head start by having their cases that they already are in.
Do you think that by virtue of Trump having won the Electoral College and the popular vote, that may have some impact on the Trump administration's position as it relates to actually allowing people to go ahead and cast ballots? I mean, you could make the argument, it's a reductive argument, but you could make the argument that more people voted for him, and so allowing more people to vote may not be on its face a bad thing for Trump or Republicans.
No, that is not at all how they see it. Look, just the other day, the Republican National Committee was in court in Arizona, still trying to disenfranchise voters by challenging the election procedure manual. You have Republicans around the country in court today and tomorrow and yesterday in cases in which they are advocating to restrict voting rights. In the state of North Carolina, in a very closely contested judicial election, something that you and I have talked about, and I know you have interviewed Allison Riggs, the justice who is the Democrat who has now won that race but is involved in this. The Republican Party of North Carolina is trying to toss out 60,000 votes, including the votes of people protected by federal law who are military and overseas voters protected to have their votes count. So no, Republicans believe that they are in control and can shape who can vote and whose vote counts, and they are not giving that up. And so I think, just like in that North Carolina instance where it turns out that the people challenged were disproportionately black versus white, they were disproportionately young versus old, and they were overwhelmingly Democrats versus Republicans. I think that they feel more emboldened, not more likely to back away.
Well, look, you have been, a leader in terms of beating the drum about exactly this issue, and you've done it on Democracy Docket, which is the news outlet you founded to focus on everything voting in elections. It's something that I use on a daily basis, especially in light of legacy media continuing to drop the ball. So for those who are watching right now, if you're not yet signed up for Democracy Docket, please do yourself a favor and do so. I'll put the link right here on the screen and also in the post description of this video. Marc, this obviously puts more of an onus on firms like yours. So what role do you see ELG and similar firms playing in the future of voting rights cases now?
Look, I mean, the Democracy Docket just put out a report about the litigation from last election cycle, and we saw an absolute explosion of litigation across the board. Okay, we saw a particular explosion of litigation brought by the Republican National Committee, its state parties, and its conservative allies. And, really the only thing that stood between them and success in court over the last 2 years were the private litigants, right? The Democratic Party did not match, and this is, there are reasons for this, and you can go into them in other videos, but the Democratic Party didn't match what the Republican Party was doing. So it really fell upon private litigants, private law firms, outside groups to carry that load. And that is going to be an even bigger challenge in the years ahead, because now the Republican Party has not only the RNC and the state parties and all this web of funded groups, but they now have the Department of Justice as well. And so, there's going to be more need than ever to challenge these restrictions, to challenge bad state laws, and there's going to be more ways in which Donald Trump will try to undermine democracy.
What about Republicans' efforts to undermine private rights of action, which basically at this point, private rights of action means that private firms, not including those in the government, but firms like yours will be able to litigate this stuff. I mean, that basically at this point, without the DOJ, without the government advocating for voting rights, that is our last vestige of hope here in terms of actually protecting this stuff. And so how big of a threat and how seriously are you taking the Republicans' efforts to block private rights of action in terms of voting rights cases?
Yeah, this is a really good point, and it is, we could do a whole episode just on this. I mean, the big canary in the coal mine right now is whether or not the Republicans will get their way and say that only the Department of Justice can invoke these federal laws to protect citizens from illegal voting discrimination. Okay, that is when just so that everyone understands, when you say private rights of action, it has been the case since the Voting Rights Act was passed in the 1960s that private groups and organizations could enforce violations of the Voting Rights Act in the same way that the Department of Justice could, and Republicans now want to scale that back. They had wanted to scale it back because frankly, most of the litigation that is brought by private plaintiffs, but now they have an additional incentive. which is that they now, for the next 4 years, control the Department of Justice. And so if they can shut down the ability of anyone other than Harmeet Dhillon to enforce the Voting Rights Act, then there will be no enforcement of the Voting Rights Act. Or more precisely, the Voting Rights Act will be enforced in ways that will be absolutely a bizarro world, a house of mirrors from the way in which it's supposed to be enforced.
Well, look, I know that in terms of defending private rights of action, you are going to be on the forefront of making sure that that remains intact, and so that you yourself will be able to fight back against the Republicans' worst excesses in this area. So again, this is where I come in and request that everybody do what we can, some small step that we can all take to support the work that Marc and his team are doing, which is to sign up for Democracy Docket. Again, I'll put the link right here on the screen and also in the post description of this video. These are exactly the voices that we need to lift up. These are the people that we need to support. So that's a small step that we can all take here. I'm Brian Tyler Cohen.
I'm Marc Elias.
This is Democracy Watch.